This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I'm Dr. Duke, and I am joined today by Alex Newman. Alex, how are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Duke.
Well, we want to try to be a little upbeat today. We'll see if it holds. When we're talking about education, it's hard to be terribly optimistic, but certainly good news. We have good news here from the homeschooling movement. Homeschooling continues to rise dramatically. This is the Washington Post analysis. So, these aren't necessarily right-wingers making these claims. Homeschooling has become America's fastest growing form of education and continues to explode in popularity long after the pandemic. There were those people, public school advocates, arguing that once we got back away from COVID, all those kids had come flooding back to the public schools. And that doesn't seem to be the case, does it, Alex?
No, it's not the case. And you and I both knew that was not going to happen. After parents realized how horrific the system was, and after parents realized how fun and doable homeschooling is, I knew for a fact that we were not going to get millions flooding back into the government school system. This should have been obvious. But I think even though it is good news, the information that the Washington Compost is reporting, we need to realize why they're reporting it, right? They're not reporting this so that we can run a victory lap and say, ha, we got you, you dumb government schools. That's what you get for hurting our children. They're doing this because they're preparing a full-blown demonization campaign against homeschooling and eventually an effort to regulate and then outright abolish it. And they even drop a few hints in this so-called analysis that they put out there. They talk about the unregulated home, and it's coming from all fronts. John Oliver, that clown, I never watched his show before, but I saw some breakdown of what he was doing, calling for states to radically regulate homeschooling. So this is coming at us right now. They realize that millions of kids are leaving the system. Millions of kids will leave the system in the years ahead. And so they're now basically hitting the panic button with this Washington Compost analysis.
Well, here's a quote from the Post. Quote, "Homeschooling surging popularity crosses every measurable line of politics, geography, and demographics." That's a big deal, and they don't like it. You're exactly right. And this is the new frontier. This is where we're heading. We've got some charts to show you. This is a chart showing how stunningly it has leapt. Now, again, that big steep line up was indeed during the COVID period, but look, it's not gone down quite much, and plus 51% from 2017 and 18. That is a stunning number. Do we have any reasonable guess, Alex, about how many families are homeschooling in this country right now?
Well, I've actually seen a variety of different estimates. The reality is nobody has an exact number because a lot of states don't track this, which is good. States have no business knowing where every single child is. These children are the responsibility of parents, not the state. But the best estimates I've seen range from about 2.5 million to about 5 million. And I guess, there's some wiggle room there about what is homeschooling. If you're taking one class through a government system, are you still a homeschooler? So depending on how you define it, Dr. Brian Ray at the National Home Education Research Institute, he's usually got the best data, far better than anything the Compost or even the government has. The last estimate I saw from him was slightly under 3 million, I believe.
Returning back to the chart here, you see not only is there a precipitous rise in homeschooling, you also have a downward arc for public school education. And you mentioned, go to the second slide we have here. These are the states. Now, the states that are blocked out that don't have data is because the states do not provide that data. But if you take a look at the states that are represented here, it's pretty remarkable. How about New York? 103%. 55% in Massachusetts, 72% raise in Florida. I think that's because of the governor there. Then you've got California, 78%. It's really remarkable, and it's not just conservative states, as I'm pointing out here. The Washington D.C. How about that? 108% rise in homeschooling. This is really stunning information, and certainly it explains why the left is losing their lunch over this.
Yep. And I believe it also explains part of the reason why the teachers' unions have such a vested interest in the open borders. They realize that in virtually every state, their funding for these indoctrination centers is tied to how many butts they have in the chairs. They got a lot less butts in the chairs right now because a lot of families are withdrawing from this wicked, godless, diabolical system for dumbing down, indoctrinating, sexualizing children. So they need new victims. And so they say, hey, open up the borders. Who cares if the kids are with their parents or not? Put them in the hands of a pimp. We don't care. We just need more funding for our brainwash camps. So I think the only reason that we haven't seen an even more catastrophic decline, and you see this clearly in states like California, is because they're able to suck in all these illegal immigrants and get the victims, children, into these government schools. So I think that's really even concealing the enormity of the decline in attendance in public schools. And you see this in some districts. A lot of them are having to sell buildings. Some districts are down 10 or even more % in attendance. And it's going to get worse for them. I think, again, that's why they want the border wide open. They need more people to keep their funding levels.
Yeah, the analysis for this data came from 32 states and the District of Columbia, which represents more than 60% of the school-age children in the United States. The data is incomplete because some of those states do not have reliable tallies of homeschoolers, and 11 states, including Texas, Michigan, Connecticut, and others, do not require families to notify the state when they decide to homeschool. Nevertheless, these numbers are available, and they indicate homeschooling has become, quote, a mainstream of American educational system education, unquote. This is from the Post. Before the pandemic, of course, the numbers we thought were about 1.5 million homeschoolers. I don't believe that. I think there were more. And they're telling us now, the National Center of Education Statistics says there's between 1.9 and 2.7 million homeschoolers, and that doesn't jibe with their own charts. If their charts that the Post we just showed you, if they're true, those numbers have to be significantly higher, don't they, Alex?
Yeah, they do. And there's a number of nuances here, Duke, that make this especially complicated. Like, I'll give you the example in my home state of Florida, where I've followed this battle very carefully. In fact, I've spoken with the governor about it here. We just passed at the beginning of 2023 HB 1. And we followed in the footsteps of Arizona and some other states. And what this does is it opens up tax money for different alternatives. Now, I thought this was a terrible idea. I think this is actually going to be their strategy for roping the homeschoolers back in, is offering them free money, just like the cheese in the mousetrap. So one of the things that we fought to secure here in Florida, we fought very hard for this because the lobbyists behind this didn't want to do that. But we actually created a distinction. If you start taking government money now, you're no longer classified as a homeschooler, even if you're basically homeschooling, right? And we did this very strategically and very importantly. We did not want homeschoolers to get caught up in the regulation that will inevitably come on those who are taking government money. And so what we did, and Arizona did this before us, we split it into two different categories. If you educate at home with your own money, you're a homeschooler. If you educate at home with the government's money, you have in Florida what's called a personalized education plan. There are already some additional regulations, restrictions, testing requirements, and things like that. And so depending on how you calculate the number of homeschoolers, there may be significantly more than 2.7 million. Again, it just depends on what definition you use. I would say if you're homeschooling at home with government money, you probably shouldn't be counted as a homeschooler because you're still in bed with the government. For right now, you still have a lot of freedom in both Florida and Arizona, but that will probably not be the case indefinitely.
You and I did a story last week, Alex, and I urge you to go back and look at the archives of the Dr. Duke Show and listen. We talked about an academic, and he's one of many, who made the argument that there ought to be absolutely no parental rights when it comes to education, that the state should be the only stakeholder when it comes to children and what kind of education that they get, and there should be no alternative schools. There has to be only public schools. We know that in the election just yesterday, California is moving even quicker to data mine our kids and to force kids into experimentation with all sorts of social justice activism in lieu of real education. The schools are rapidly going full Marxist ideology all the time. And they're being encouraged to do so. They're being paid to do that by the federal government and certain states. And huge left-wing benefactors are endowing this kind of stuff. So The noose is tightening. This is good news. And interestingly, there's only 2 states that fell back to pre-COVID levels of homeschooling. They are Georgia and Maryland, 2 states that don't have a lot in common. Not sure what you make of that demographic, but maybe we pivot here before we go to break in a couple of minutes. What are the threats, Alex? You and I have done a lot of work on this. There's a lot of ways they plan to come after homeschool. Give us some examples of what they have in line for us.
Well, I think the full-blown assault is not coming for a while, right? They're not going to come out and start introducing legislation to ban homeschooling yet. They're not going to come out and announce legislation to mandate certain curricula and things like this yet. The real threat, I believe the immediate threat, is we're going to see what we saw in 2023 on an even more widespread scale. We're going to see the government offering money, free tax money, to homeschoolers and private school students. And a lot of good conservatives have gotten on board with this. You know, one of the things I love so much about Freedom Project Academy is that from the start, we always said we will never take government money. And I think a lot of people didn't understand that. Well, it's my taxes. Why shouldn't I get free money? Well, because with the shekels come the shackles. With the money come the handcuffs, right? And so that is the big threat. Now, UNESCO, and I did a report on this, I believe, last year for the Newman Report. UNESCO, the UN's Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, they put out a paper as part of their Global Education Monitoring Project calling on governments to start giving tax money to what they call non-state educational providers, which obviously would include homeschool parents, it would include private schools, parochial schools, etc. And they say specifically why they want that. It's not because they love you. It's not because they want to encourage homeschooling. It's because they want to, in their words, impose government equity goals on all students. They want to force all students into the national testing regime. They want to impose non-discrimination standards on private schools. So if a guy comes in wearing a tutu, and he's got all kinds of weird sexual perversions, and you don't want him to teach your kindergartners at your Christian school, you can't discriminate. So that's where they're going with this. That is the really big immediate threat. And this is not a hypothetical threat, Duke. I did a major article in the New American Magazine about this. I showed numerous examples. It's exactly what they did in Australia, South Africa, Sweden, the Netherlands, Belgium, and it's what they will do here. In fact, in Utah, right after they passed the so-called school choice bill, they didn't even wait for the ink to dry on the governor's signature before the state propaganda, government-run, government-funded, and even mainstream media started promoting this idea that homeschoolers were going to teach their children to be Nazis, and they were doing it now with tax money, and so there needed to be regulation. It's coming, folks. Mark my words. Do not take the government money. Do not take the government money. Do not take the government money.
And before we transition into the break, interesting, the article points out that the fastest growth is in the deep blue New York, where the homeschool population has more than doubled since 2017 to almost 52,000 kids. Again, I think that's way low. It says also here that Florida has the largest homeschool population, 154,000 students. That sounds awfully low for Florida. Would you say, living in Florida, you think those numbers are accurate?
I agree. It does sound low. You know, I spoke at the state homeschool convention, what was it, in May, and I think we had 20-something thousand people. So, homeschooling around here is just absolutely huge. We've got more co-ops than we know what to do with. Every single co-op is like packed to the max. We do homeschooling events, and they're just absolutely full. I don't know. I would suspect that there are more. There are a lot of parents, too. And I don't want to give anything away here, but there are a lot of parents, too, who don't comply with the reporting requirements. We know some, right? In Florida, you're supposed to send a letter to your county school superintendent telling them you're going to homeschool. A lot of parents don't do that, and I understand why they don't do that. Who does the government think it is to ask where my children are when there's no reason to suspect that a crime has been committed, when there's no reason, right? We're innocent until proven guilty. So we know a lot of people who don't sign up, and I suspect that's true not just across Florida, but all over the country.
So more to come on the Dr. Duke Show with Alex Newman, including what I think is some more good news. We'll see you in a moment. Back now on the Dr. Duke Show with Alex Newman, and we want to be a little bit upbeat comparatively on this show. We talked about in the first segment how homeschooling seems to be really skyrocketing. The numbers seem to be growing up, and not just in conservative states, but also very liberal states like New York. And so we have another piece of good news. We've all said for a long time, unless parents and kids themselves stand up to what's going on in the public schools, nothing's going to change. And we have good news from Loudoun County. That's sort of the epicenter on the East Coast of this craziness. This is where that trans boy was allowed to rape girls in the girls' bathroom and ultimately was covered up by the school board. So speaking about what's going on in Loudoun here, we've got a video. Let's just start with the video to get something on the table and we'll talk about it.
Students at Woodgrove High School walked out in protest of the Loudoun County School Board's policy that allows non-binary, gender fluid, and transgender students to use the school bathrooms and locker rooms of their choice.
In the locker rooms in the morning, it's an invasion of privacy, as I said, because when men and natural-born males are in our locker rooms and they are showering in the morning, natural-born females can walk in there as they please and as they want to do so, and that is not okay, and it goes against what we believe in.
In 2021, the Loudoun County School Board voted 9-3 to adopt the district-wide policy known as Policy 8040. These students have had enough, and they want the policy reversed.
Is this uncomfortable, you think, for students here, this policy that allows non-binary and transgender students to use the locker rooms and bathrooms of their choice?
Very uncomfortable.
I want to be able to, when I get off of football practice, to go put my pads away and change with not feeling uncomfortable with other genders in there watching me. Especially, I feel the girls should feel the same way about the situation. How would you feel if you're a female changing with a male in the restroom?
It's a massive safety risk, and they don't do anything about it, and we express these concerns, and they ignore us and write us off as right-wing crazies. We're not crazy, we just don't want to be in danger on a daily basis in this building.
Meanwhile, a smaller group of counter-protesters waved pride flags.
I'm here to support all the children, no matter who they are. Yours, mine, all of them.
About 50 to 100 students walked out asking the school board to restore girls-only and boys-only locker rooms, showers, and bathrooms in schools.
It should be the entire school.
But there are a lot of people who are scared to speak out against it, so they stayed inside because they didn't want to receive the backlash.
Some very articulate kids. And I think it's interesting that with the kids, it was all students. Who did they go to for the counter-protesters? An old woman, right? A very butchy-looking old woman who's there for all the kids, Alex. Just there for all the kids.
Yeah, my guess is she didn't have kids there. But and it's interesting, she said all the kids. I guess all the kids except the massive group of children who are very upset about what's going on and who don't want to have to change and shower and use the restroom with members of the opposite sex. Fake media is just out of control, and this is more evidence of it. But it is encouraging to see the youngsters, after all these years of brainwashing, all these years of radical indoctrination, still having enough sense to say, wait a minute, you people are nuts. This is crazy. It needs to stop.
Yeah, not surprisingly, the school board, the teachers, the school itself isn't quite as enthusiastic about that protest. I mean, if these kids were marching out to support Hamas, I think that would be perfectly fine for Loudoun County as well. So there's not going to be the same level of respect for this kind of a walkout. In fact, something very similar happened in a small school district in Ohio. And basically the superintendent said, hey, this is punishable. If you're not going to be in class, you're going to walk out. You're going to have to be mandatory detentions after class. Again, would they have done that? Would the superintendent threaten the kids, the school board, if they had walked out in favor of LGBTQ issues? I don't think they would have. And we've got a two-tier system, right? When kids engage in this kind of activism for the left, they're heralded as heroes. There are no consequences. They don't get any reprimands for taking time away from public school education. No. This is heroic and brave and what we want our kids to do. When they start doing this kind of activists to protest the left, well, then it becomes a bit of a problem, doesn't it, Alex?
Yeah, that's how it is. We got a double standard of justice for the grown-ups, where you protest election rigging, you go to jail, you spend 1,000 days in prison with no trial. You do an insurrection to support Hamas. Yeah, you should get a medal. You're so brave and courageous. Same thing for the children, right? You support common sense. You're an evil right-wing extremist. You need to be brainwashed more and punished. You support crazy left-wing things. Oh, you're a hero. You're so brave. It truly is amazing. But clearly, even the kids in the crazy Loudoun County are seeing through this. So that is very hopeful. I think the totalitarians are having more resistance than they would have liked, and that's why we're seeing crazy proposals like the one we talked about last week, where they want to license parents and screen them for their views on homosexuality before they'll be allowed to raise their own biological children. I mean, these people are clearly dangerous. They clearly need to be kept far, far away from other people's children, and yet, the media treats them like they walk on water. It's very bizarre.
Well, we want to temper our enthusiasm. So 2 years ago, moms and dads, for just this reason, Loudoun and Fairfax County, these were two big Democrat counties where the parents were infuriated by the behavior of the public schools, too progressive. And 2 years ago, we got Glenn Youngkin as the governor, and there was a switch to more Republicans in the legislature. Well, as of the recent election, we find out now that parents must have said, okay, we got our change. That was it. We stopped fighting because the Assembly and the Senate goes back to Democrats in Virginia, and the governor is there. He's going to have a much harder time now to pass any legislation to reform education. And this is how we lose, right? We can get people motivated in very high numbers in very specific cases. But once there is even moderate change, everything falls back, right? But the left pursues vehemently off-year, on-year elections. They never stop. Seems like a lot of people on the right, they'll fight, they'll get a little bit of change, the beginning of better times, and they settle for that. And then 2 years later, all that good work seems to go away.
Well, there is obviously some of that, Duke, but I also think that what we're dealing with here is a handful of very, very powerful institutions are doing everything they can to suppress popular opposition, to suppress popular resistance. But this resistance is building. It's like it's like under pressure, just ready to explode. And when it does explode, liars and propagandists and people who are trying to pervert children had better watch out, because elections are going to just absolutely sweep them out of office. The fury and the rage that is building out there as these people are ignored and marginalized and ridiculed and spit on. And these really are, I believe, the majority. Yeah, the media can try to manipulate it. They can even dupe some, unfortunately, ignorant and easy to manipulate people. But this can only go on for so long. And I suspect that the opposition is building in a very real way, in a way that they're doing their best to suppress, but I don't know how much longer it's going to be able to hold.
That's the question. I hope you're exactly right about that, Alex. I'd like to believe it. We just look at the elections yesterday, and from top to bottom, the Democrats won despite the economy, despite what's going on in the schools, despite what's going on in the global stage, despite how high gas prices are. It doesn't seem to have reached anything like critical mass. You're right. I hope you're right. This is coming. But what signs do you see in the electorate that that's happening?
Well, Duke, just look at this. Look at the campaign ads of the Democrats. Look at the campaign slogans of the Democrats. They didn't run on what they're actually standing for. They didn't run on, hey, let's kill more babies. Let's turn your kids into transgender. They didn't run on what they're actually doing. They use conservative talking points. We need to support parents. We need common sense values. These are meaningless slogans. And they used very effective organizing. They've got huge amounts of money, and they've got the fake media on their side. But again, people are starting to see through it, as we saw from the homeschooling data. People are starting to see through it. So I believe their deception is crumbling. I believe it's going to crumble even faster. What that means, hard to know. But I think all you have to really do is look at how the Democrats campaigned, look at the things that they said. Obviously, they're lying, but they know what people want to hear. And what people want to hear is exactly what you and I are saying. So I think it's very, very telling that they don't campaign on what they truly believe. They campaign on talking points that really are essentially conservative.
It would also perhaps help if you had an effective resistance party, one that actually knew its backside from its elbow and might be able to, contradict some of those lies. But alas, we didn't see that recently, and that's going to wrap up the show. If you enjoy the program, please subscribe to our podcast channel. Simply search Dr. Duke Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on Rumble. Visit rumble.com/FreedomProject. For all of us at the Dr. Duke Show and the wonderful Alex Newman, we thank you, and we will see you next week.